March 22, 1982. A18 of filming 10 to midnight in Los Angeles. Director Lee Thompson was setting up a complex night scene when he suddenly clutched his chest, gasped, and collapsed onto the pavement. The crew froze in horror as the 67-year-old director lay motionless on the ground. "Someone call 911, the assistant director screamed. Charles Bronson, who had been reviewing the scene blocking 50 feet away, ran over and knelt beside Thompson. He checked for a pulse, found one, weak but present, and stayed with him, talking to him, keeping him conscious until the paramedics arrived. Thompson was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Diagnosis: massive heart attack. He would survive, but he would need surgery and months of recovery. The film had 3 weeks of shooting remaining and was already over budget. The studio's response was immediate: shut down production, cut losses, or find a replacement director fast. But finding a director mid-production who could match Thompson's vision and work with Charles was nearly impossible. The film would likely be canceled, millions of dollars and weeks of work wasted. That is when Charles made an unexpected proposal. "I will finish it." What happened over the next 21 days became one of Hollywood's most closely guarded secrets. Charles Bronson directing a major studio film, completing the production, and then insisting the credit go entirely to the Hospitalized director who had shot less than 2/3 of the movie. This is the untold story of the film Charles Bronson secretly directed, and why he refused to let anyone know until 20 years later. Lee Thompson and Charles Bronson had worked together on 9 films by 1982, had a comfortable, efficient working relationship built on mutual respect and shared understanding. Thompson knew how to shoot Charles, the angles that worked, the pacing that suited his style, the minimal dialogue that played to his strengths. And Charles trusted Thompson's vision, rarely questioning his choices. But Thompson was 67 and had been pushing himself hard. Long night shoots, complex action sequences, the pressure of a tight budget and demanding studio. He had been complaining of chest pains for days, but dismissed them as indigestion and stress. The night he collapsed, they were filming a chase sequence, technically demanding, requiring multiple camera setups and coordination between vehicles and stunts. Thompson had been on his feet for 14 hours straight. When the ambulance took him away, the crew stood in shocked silence. The assistant director, a competent professional named Mark Riley, tried to rally everyone. "Okay, let us wrap for tonight. We will figure out next steps tomorrow." But Charles was already thinking ahead. He pulled Mark aside. "What does the shooting schedule look like? How much do we have left?" 3 weeks, maybe 22 shooting days, plus pickup shots and inserts. Why? Because if we shut down now, this film dies. The studio will not wait for Lee to recover. They will cancel it. What choice do we have? We cannot film without a director. Charles looked at the set, at the crew packing equipment, at the 3 weeks of work that would be lost. "I will do it." "Do what?" "Direct. I will finish the film." Mark stared at him. "Charles, you are the star. You cannot also be the director. The union will not allow it. Insurance will not cover it, and the studio will never approve. Lee remains the director of record. His name stays on everything. I am just executing his vision, following his plans, making sure the crew keeps working. That is still directing." "Then we do not call it that. I am the actor who is very involved in the filmmaking process. Whatever term makes it work legally." Mark was quiet for a moment. "You are serious." "Completely. Call the studio. Tell them we can keep filming. Tell them Lee set up detailed plans for every remaining scene before he got sick. Tell them I will make sure we stay on schedule and on budget, but Lee's name stays on as director. non-negotiable. The conversation with Canon Films, the studio producing 10 to Midnight, was tense. They were skeptical. An actor directing without experience, a film potentially rudderless. But Charles made a compelling case, backed by Mark Riley's assurance that the remaining schedule was straightforward. The studio agreed to a trial period, 3 days of filming. If it worked, they would continue. If it did not, it would shut down production. Charles spent that night at Cedars Sinai, not visiting Thompson. He was in ICU, not allowed visitors, but sitting in the waiting room, reviewing Thompson's notes and shot lists for the remaining scenes. Thompson was meticulous. Every scene had detailed diagrams showing camera placement, actor blocking, lighting setups. Charles studied these like battle plans, memorizing every detail. The next morning, Charles returned to set at 6 a.m. The crew arrived to find him already there, having spent an hour walking through the locations, visualizing each shot. When they began filming, Charles did something unexpected. He did not try to act like a director. He did not bark orders or demand attention. He simply executed Thompson's vision, exactly as Thompson had planned it. Camera here, based on Lee's diagram. Actors positioned here. Light from this angle. Let us shoot it. The crew, uncertain at first, gradually relaxed. This was not some actor on an ego trip trying to direct. This was Charles Bronson, faithfully implementing J. Lee Thompson's detailed plans. For his own scenes, Charles directed himself by feel, hitting marks Thompson had indicated, delivering lines in the style they would established over 17 days of filming. Between takes, he would review playback and adjust based on whether it matched Thompson's visual language for the film. By day 3, the system was working. They were on schedule. The footage matched the earlier material seamlessly, and morale was actually improving. The crew appreciated having clear direction rather than uncertain limbo. The studio greenlit continuing production with Charles at the helm. Over the next 3 weeks, Charles directed every aspect of the film's completion. He worked with the cinematographer on lighting. He collaborated with the stunt coordinator on action sequences. He made editing suggestions to ensure continuity with Thompson's earlier footage, but he never called himself the director. When crew members asked questions, Bobby framed his responses as, "Lee wanted it this way," or, "Based on Lee's notes, we should." Even in his own performance, Charles maintained the persona they would established. He did not use his directorial role to give himself more screen time or better angles. He stayed faithful to the film Thompson had been making. The hardest challenge was a major action sequence, a nighttime rooftop confrontation that Thompson had planned, but not yet filmed. The sequence required complex choreography, multiple camera angles, and significant stunt work. Charles worked with the stunt coordinator for 2 full days rehearsing and planning every detail. He drew his own diagrams, then modified them to match Thompson's style, based on similar sequences earlier in the film. When they shot the sequence, it took 3 nights. Charles would film a section, review playback, adjust, film again. He was demanding but not unreasonable, pushing for quality while respecting the crew's time and safety. The footage was spectacular, tense, violent, visually dynamic. It would become one of the film's most praised sequences, and Charles never told anyone he would directed it. After 21 days, principal photography wrapped. Charles had completed the film on schedule and under budget, a rare achievement in 1980s action cinema. He visited Thompson in the hospital. The director was recovering well post-surgery, but would need months of rest before working again. "I finished the film," Charles told him. Thompson looked surprised. "Already? I thought they would shut it down. I told them we would continue, that you would left detailed plans. that we could complete it. Who directed? Charles smiled slightly. You did. I just made sure the crew followed your vision. Thompson studied him. Charles, if you directed 3 weeks of this film, your name is the only one that goes on it. You are the director. I was just the actor who happened to pay attention to how you work. The DGA will not. The DGA does not need to know. As far as anyone's concerned, you directed the entire film. You just had to supervise the final weeks from the hospital due to medical emergency. Charles, you deserve credit. I do not want it. This is your film, your vision. I just executed your plans. That is all. Thompson was quiet for a long moment. Thank you. Get better, Lee. We have more films to make. 10 to Midnight was released in March 1900. Reviews were mixed, as was typical for Cannon Films action movies, but several critics specifically praised the direction. Thompson maintains tension throughout, with particularly effective use of night photography and urban locations. J. Lee Thompson was credited as director. Only he and Charles knew the truth about the final 3 weeks. The film was a modest commercial success, earning enough to justify continued collaboration between Thompson and Bronson. That they would go on to make 4 more films together over the next 6 years. For 17 years, no one outside a handful of people knew that Charles had directed a significant portion of 10 to Midnight. The crew who worked those final weeks maintained silence out of respect for both men. The studio, happy with the completed film, saw no reason to complicate the narrative. But in 1999, a documentary filmmaker researching J. Lee Thompson's career interviewed several crew members from the 1982 production. One of them, the assistant director Mark Riley, finally told the truth. Lee had a heart attack on day 18. The studio wanted to shut down. Charles Bronson stepped in and directed the final 3 weeks of production. Not just supervised, actively directed. Shot composition, actor blocking, pacing, everything. Then he insisted Lee get sole directing credit. The revelation caused a stir in film circles. People started re-examining 10 to Midnight, trying to identify which scenes Bronson had directed. Film scholars analyzed visual patterns, looking for stylistic shifts between Thompson's work and Bronson's. Most concluded they could not tell the difference. Charles had matched Thompson's style so precisely that the film felt unified throughout. When asked about it in 2001, by which time he was suffering from Alzheimer's and rarely gave interviews, Charles was dismissive. Lee got sick. I helped finish what he started. That is what professionals do. But you directed a major portion of a studio film. Does not that deserve recognition? Lee Thompson's a great director. I am an actor who paid attention. There is a difference. After Charles's death in 2003, J. Lee Thompson, who would died in 2002, was no longer around to offer his perspective. But Thompson's daughter found a letter her father had written, but never sent, addressed to Charles. Dear Charlie, I have been thinking about 10 to Midnight, and what you did. You saved that film, not just by stepping in when I could not continue, but by respecting my vision enough to execute it faithfully, rather than imposing your own ideas. That is rare in Hollywood, where everyone wants their name in lights. You could have taken directing credit. You would earned it. But you gave it to me because you knew how much it mattered to have a consistent filmography. That generosity, that selflessness, that is what I will remember most about working with you. Not the box office, not the films themselves, but the character of the man I was privileged to call my friend. Thank you, Lee. The assistant director, Mark Riley, was interviewed extensively after the truth came out. He provided the most detailed account of those 3 weeks. Charles showed up every day at 5 a.m., an hour before call time, to review the day's shots and walk the locations. He would study Lee's notes like they were scripture. He was not trying to improve on them or add his own spin. He was trying to understand exactly what Lee had envisioned and make it real. When he directed other actors, he was patient and clear. When he directed himself, he was demanding, doing take after take until it felt right. He would watch playback and say things like, "Lee would want this tighter," or "This does not match Lee pacing from earlier scenes." The rooftop sequence, that was all Charles. Lee had notes, but they were sketchy. Charles developed the full choreography, the camera movements, everything. It is one of the best sequences in the film, and he never took credit. Working with him those 3 weeks, I learned more about directing than I did in film school. Not because he was teaching, he was not, but because I watched him subordinate his ego to the project. He cared more about the film being good than about getting recognition. That is rare, especially for a movie star. The cinematographer on End to Midnight, a veteran named Adam Greenberg, also spoke about the experience. Charles understood camera language better than most directors I have worked with. He knew about lenses, about lighting, about composition. When Lee went down, I was worried we would lose the visual consistency, but Charles made sure we maintained it. He would look through the viewfinder before every shot, checking that it matched Lee's established patterns. If something felt off, he would adjust until it felt right. Not Charles Bronson right, Lee Thompson right. That roofed-up fight sequence, Charles and I spent hours working out the camera moves. He wanted it to feel dangerous, but coherent. We used long lenses to compress the space, make the drop look more deadly. We lit it so the city lights created dramatic silhouettes. Charles understood that the camera was a storytelling tool, not just a recording device. After the film was finished, Charles took me aside and said, "If anyone asks, this was Lee's vision. You and I just executed it." I started to argue that he deserved credit, and he cut me off. "Lee's name goes on the film. That is how it is. Understood? I understood." That was Charles. Principle over recognition. Film historians have since analyzed End to Midnight scene by scene, using production records to determine which scenes Thompson directed and which Bronson directed. Consensus is that roughly 40% of the finished film came from Bronson's direction. Yet stylistically, the film is seamless. Bronson did not impose his own vision. He channeled Thompson's. The result is a unified work that feels like the product of a single director's mind. Sarah Mitchell, a film studies professor who wrote extensively about the incident, offered this analysis in 2010. What Charles Bronson did on 10 to Midnight is almost unprecedented in Hollywood. Not the act of stepping in to finish a film, that has happened before, but the deliberate effacement of his own contributions is remarkable. Bronson had every right to claim co-directing credit. The Directors Guild might have objected, but he could have fought for it. Instead, he chose to honor Thompson by disappearing into his style so completely that audiences could not tell the difference. This suggests something about Bronson's artistic philosophy. He did not need recognition. He did not need his name on things. What he needed was for the work to be good, for commitments to be honored, for people to be treated fairly. Thompson had earned the directing credit by conceiving and beginning the film. Bronson simply ensured Thompson's work was not wasted. That's not ego, that's craftsmanship, and it is increasingly rare in an industry built on self-promotion. March 22, 1000. A director collapsed with a heart attack, and a film's future became uncertain. March 23, 1982. An actor said, "I will finish it," and spent 3 weeks directing in secret. April 12, 1982. That actor wrapped production, having directed 40% of a major studio film, and told everyone to credit the director he would replace. Charles Bronson never wanted to be a director. He never sought that recognition. When forced into the position by circumstance, he treated it as a responsibility, not an opportunity for glory. He directed by disappearing, by subordinating his ego, by asking, "What would Lee do?" instead of, "What do I want?" The tough guy who directed a film and refused to take credit, the action star who cared more about honoring a colleague than building his own resume. The professional who understood that sometimes the most important thing you can do is make sure someone else's name stays on the work. That is not Hollywood. That is character. 10 to Midnight remains J. Lee Thompson's film in every meaningful way, but 40% of what audiences see came from Charles Bronson's direction, and he wanted it that way. Needed it that way, because that is who he was. The man who would rather disappear than take credit that belonged to someone else, even when that credit was legitimately earned.